Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. In today's video I'm going to be demonstrating how I use the different UV resins in the JDiction range. There are now 4 to choose from, starting from the classic UV resin, which is a brilliant all-rounder, to the low viscosity, the high viscosity and the new formula UV resin. If you're unsure which one you need for your project, stay tuned and see me demonstrate how I use the 4 different UV resins, and I will also explain the best qualities and applications for each one. JDiction's classic UV resin is a wonderful all-rounder. It's the original UV resin from JDiction and I've been using it for a long time, and even though I've still got all the other ones, this is my go-to UV resin. It's a medium viscosity, and viscosity is all about the speed and friction in which it moves. But basically what people usually think of is thick and thin. This one is medium thickness. The high viscosity one coming up is thicker and the low viscosity is thinner. So this is the middle one. So for this first demonstration, I'm making a glittery heart. I'm adding quite a lot of glitter here, and you can do that, but there are a couple of things to think about. You will need a longer curing time because the light will struggle to get past all that glitter all the way through the piece. And the other thing is the mould that you use. If you're using a lot of pigment or glitter or other additions, the mould needs to be clear like the one you can see here, because you need to be able to turn it over when you've cured it from the front and get the light to it from the back as well. So here, after pouring in my glittery UV resin, you'll see me curing it for 3 minutes and then turning it over and curing it for 3 minutes from the other side. After 3 minutes on each side, it was ready to take out of the mould. It popped out very easily and it looked very beautiful. It was smooth to the touch. You'll have to take my word for that, obviously. There was no tackiness. And yeah, you can see that it's very shiny and bubble free. And now I'm going to use the back of this finished heart for my next demonstration. Now for some projects you will need a top coat of UV resin. Maybe you've sanded it, or maybe it's a little bit lumpy like this because it's got glitter in. Whatever your reason, you will sometimes need to put an extra layer of resin on the top. And so what I'm going to be doing now is just doing half of the heart with the classic UV resin. So I've poured a little bit on and I'm just teasing it to the edges. I used a little bit of heat from my embossing gun to get rid of any bubbles, and then I cured it under the UV lamp again for 2 minutes. Okay, here it is after curing. As you can see, I missed a little bit, but nevertheless, you can see how adding a top coat really brings out the colours. And so, yeah, it looks a lot better with the top coat on. And now it's time for the other side of the heart, and that brings us onto the high viscosity UV resin. The high viscosity resin is perfect for top coats and for doming because it's thicker and slow moving. And so when it gets to the edge, you don't need to be worrying so much about it dripping over the side. It just stays in position nicely and it gives you a beautiful domed finish. It has a slightly longer curing time than the classic UV resin at 3 to 6 minutes. You know, it's hard to say an exact time for UV resin. It all depends on how thick you've poured it, how deep you've poured it, and how much addition you have in there. So yeah, if there's a lot of pigment in there, you will need to cure it for a lot longer. Okay, it's cured, and now let me show you the finished result, and hopefully the camera will have captured it enough for you to see the difference. So it's on the left, and you can see the lump as it's higher than the one on the right. So hopefully that really can show you how well the high viscosity resin domes. And yeah, that's why I love JDiction's high viscosity UV resin. As you will imagine, JDiction's low viscosity resin is the opposite of the high viscosity. It's thinner and it's fast moving. And that makes it perfect for detailed moulds like this peacock mould I have here. And this time I'm adding pigment powders to the mould before adding the UV resin. And then when you pour in your UV resin and cure it, the mica powder will have stuck to the UV resin, so it picks up all the colours off the mould. After I'd finished applying all the mica powders to the mould, I turned it over and shook out all the excess powder onto some scrap paper. Next, it was time to add my low viscosity UV resin, and because it's such a detailed mould, I decided not to just fill it up. I just added enough to cover the surface and moved it around from side to side until the whole surface was coated, and that way I was less likely to get pockets of air trapped into those deep details in the mould. After doing that, I quickly popped any bubbles that were there with my hot air gun and then added the rest of the UV resin. I didn't quite fill up to the top. I left about 1 millimetre of space at the top. The low viscosity UV resin has a shorter curing time, so this had around 2 minutes, and then it was ready for the next step, which was to add a black layer to the back. And the reason I did that is because it makes the colours really stand out on the front of the peacock. I'm using just the tiniest bit off the end of my stirring stick of black liquid pigment for this. Now, if you don't have black liquid pigment, you could just paint the surface of the peacock that you've got so far with black acrylic paint and then do a clear layer over the top. But I had some black liquid pigment and I'm using that. And the reason I didn't just fill it all with black in the first place instead of using the clear is because when you're using an opaque pigment like this one, the UV light can struggle to get through if you're doing a thick layer, and you would end up with uncured resin on the inside. So I wouldn't recommend ever using a lot of pigment in a thick layer of UV resin. Once I'd finished the final layer, I put it under the UV lamp for 4 minutes, giving it that extra bit of time because of the black pigment. And then it was time to take it out of the mould and have a look. It was always exciting when you do this technique to see how those colours will look, and I wasn't disappointed. Look at the way the low viscosity UV resin has picked up all the detail from the mould. One thing about using mica powders on the mould is the surface of your finished piece is not shiny. So if you want a shiny finish, you can use the low viscosity UV resin a little bit like a varnish. Just use an old brush and brush it on, put it under the lamp and cure it, and then you have a lovely shiny finished result. Okay, we're on to the last one, which is the new formula UV resin. And for this, I'm keeping the demonstration very simple because this is another all-rounder resin. You could use it for any UV resin project. So the difference between this one and the classic UV resin, which I showed you at the beginning, is that it's a little bit thinner, which I prefer. So it's a lower viscosity, but the main difference is that it's got no odour. So if you find you have a problem with the smell that you get when curing UV resins, this is the one for you. I couldn't smell anything at all. It's also more environmentally friendly, which is wonderful, and it's something we're all concerned about nowadays. So I'm using my new formula resin to make 6 little beads. And because the cavities in this bead mould are quite deep, I half filled them with the UV resin, gave them a little squeeze to get rid of any air pockets, used my hot air gun to get rid of the small bubbles, and then filled it up to the top. And just like with the first project, I cured it for 2 minutes from the top and then turned it over and cured it for 2 minutes from the bottom. When I took the first bead out of the mould, I could see just on the inside that it was still a little bit under-cured. So all I did was I put it back under the lamp for another 2 minutes before demoulding the rest of them. And as you can see, the beads which I created with the new formula UV resin are very clear and beautiful, and I was very happy with them. I hope this video has helped you to better understand the JDiction range of UV resins. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed and you would like to, please do that also, and I will see you again next week. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.